I read about a photographer named David Hume Kennerly that Gerald Ford had just invited to become the official White House photographer. And I wanted to meet this guy. I was not a professional photographer. So I arranged to go to a workshop in Boonville, South Carolina. And at the end of the workshop, I managed to volunteer to be a chauffeur driver. And I drove David and Sandra Isert, his picture editor, to the airport, hoping some of his pixie dust would wear off on me. David won the Pulitzer Prize at 25 years old. And I thought that we would just have a little chat about his career because not only is David an incredibly talented photographer, but he's one of the most generous people I've ever met. One of the things I heard about David before I met him was that despite the fact that he had this very unusual relationship with Gerald Ford, that instead of hoarding it and keeping it for himself, that you basically invited photographers to come in and gave them the same kind of access that you had. So I wanted to, we only have 20 minutes and David's got some great stories, but I wanted to ask you very quickly how you went from being in a small town. Did you ever study photography? How did you go? How did you win the Pulitzer Prize at 25 years old?
Just luck. Well, I've been driven to be a photographer from the time I was a young kid. Any Oregonians in here? I was born and raised in Roseburg, Oregon, which is a really small town, and I had no association with the business, but I just had a desire to take pictures. And all the way up through high school, I started out in Roseburg, the small town, moved up to just outside of Portland, worked on the high school annual and the paper. And one of the great things, there were two compelling factors to me. I would meet girls because I could give them the photos I took, and I could skip
the
class.
number one reason most men
Yeah,
do
actually,
photography.
it was the first and second reason. The third reason was I could get out of school and to take pictures. And so by the time I was 18, I was a staff photographer on the Oregon Journal, which is was the afternoon paper. And 66 is when my career really started, when I was 18.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you go from working in a small town newspaper to working? Did you work for Time Magazine before you went to Vietnam?
No, I mean, the quick evolution was going from the Oregon Journal, and then I went into the National Guard to get out of going to Vietnam. And
how'd that turn out?
But then I had to get out of the National Guard in order to go to Vietnam. So it was not a problem many people shared at the time. And
so how old were you when you went to Vietnam?
I was 24. And I went to UPI in Los Angeles, New York, and Washington. And what really gave me my the urge to cover politics was photographing Robert Kennedy in Portland, Oregon in 1966. And there were two big-time photographers there, Bill Epridge and Steve Shapiro. And Bill was a Life magazine photographer, and Kennedy was speaking in a labor hall and was like way up here, and there were all these people. And I was talking to these two photographers who, quite frankly, I didn't know who they were, but then I heard he was Life magazine. Oh, my God. You know, and he said, well, just hang on to my coat. And so Epridge just cut through the crowd. I got up there. One of my favorite pictures ever was Kennedy. But what happened afterwards, we followed the motorcade out to the airport, and all the Kennedy and everybody got on the plane, including Epridge and Shapiro. And it was like the final scene in Casablanca. The plane door closes and it goes off into the fog, and I'm standing there by the side of the road. And I truly wanted to be on that airplane. I'll never forget it. And I think my career toward politics was driven from there. And so I got to Washington, D.C. with UPI. And actually, my first ride on Air Force One, I was 23 years old as a UPI staffer. And the one overriding memory of that was we could smuggle Coors beer back on Air Force One from San Clemente back to Washington, D.C., where you couldn't buy it, you know, among other things. But, hey, it was the 70s, you know, it was like, which is pretty much the same as the 60s, just run over.
There, huh?
Oh, that was my Columbo moment on Air Force One. But then I went to Vietnam, and I was covering. I felt as a young a photographer, if I didn't go to Vietnam and cover the greatest story of my generation, I was going to be kicking myself for the rest of my life, and I just I didn't want to live like that. So I finally handled the UPI guys into sending me over, and it was 1971, and the war was kind of winding down. But I managed to get out of the Army and get a big leave because they didn't have weekend meetings in Saigon, apparently. And one thing led to another. And my first year, I was 24 years old. And 71 was when I took the photographs that ended up getting me the Pulitzer Prize.
Now,
Which was a shock, by the way. Because these days, everybody lobbies for it. I didn't even know I'd been entered for it.
So you're 24 years old. You're going out in the battlefield with soldiers. Is it scary? Is it exciting? What is it like when you get back at the end of the day when you've been out there? I mean, how do the soldiers regard you? They think you were a parasite? Did they like your company?
Back then, the soldiers were so happy that somebody from the outside world would show up and pay attention to them, particularly as a photographer, and particularly the younger photographers. And you saw a picture of me earlier, sort of wearing the fedora. That's what I wore into combat. Sometimes I'd have a helmet, but generally I just wear this. I had a beard and a fedora, and they thought, "Wow, this guy is like out of his mind." Number one, and because I guarantee you, most of those guys wouldn't have been there unless they had to be, and so they had a lot of respect for us, and I had a lot of respect for them, and it was a great relationship. And it may have been the last time, really, where you could have, literally, you could cover the war by getting on a helicopter, going anywhere you wanted to go. I mean, it was not like now with so much restriction, and it was just a wild ride for me, and I loved doing it. I mean, I look back on it. I've never had one bad dream about Vietnam. I was there for 2.5 years. I almost got killed several times. Friends of mine have been killed there, but we were all there because we wanted to be. So it's a little different than being sent over, to where you don't want to go.
Now, you and I have a good friend, David Burnett, who told me a story about he went out one morning to go out on a patrol. You can just go out and basically get on a helicopter, and the helicopter took off, and the pilot decided it was too heavy, and that whoever had been in Vietnam the shortest time had to get off the helicopter. So Burnett got off the helicopter, and that was the chopper where Larry Burroughs and a lot of other photographers were killed.
Right.
They never found them, never saw them again. Did you have moments like that where basically you turn left instead of right, and you're alive today, but you wouldn't have been otherwise?
Well, yes. I mean, that happened quite a bit, and I think one of the things about Vietnam, people write books about it and their experience. If you went this way around a corner, you would have a different experience than going that way. And it was particularly like that in Cambodia, which is an incredibly dangerous place. And a lot of the photographers who were killed in Cambodia because you'd go out in a civilian car out on the road. Mm-hmm. And they just didn't take prisoners for the most part. And so I spent time over there.
But did the camera make you feel invulnerable? Like because you're behind the camera somehow, you almost feel like you're watching it instead of actually being there?
I never felt that detached, actually, under fire. But I think a lot of the pictures that I took I don't think I took any really great combat pictures because it's so hard. What people don't understand unless they've been in combat is that people tend to be down low, so most of my good pictures probably came on the periphery. I certainly saw enough action, but I felt if I was there to take pictures, I wanted to take pictures. So that did take my mind off of it a little bit. But I was scared a lot when I was out, and I remember I kept getting religious, and saying, "Oh, God, if you just get me out of this one situation, I won't go out again." Of course, then go back to Saigon, get drunk, go out the next day, and pray again.
So you're out there for a day. You've done all this. You've been taking these pictures. It's been scary. You've gotten back. I remember hearing you tell a story once. I think I was in a bar with you in Bangkok many years ago. Could have been any night. But you were talking about the fact that you felt more alive at the end of a day in Vietnam than you often felt back here because you've been so close to danger and death. Does that become an addiction?
No, it wasn't an addiction for me. I mean, I've been in several of the wars, but not like that. I mean, I've been married 4 times, which I find much more difficult in combat. And, and so, give me a good old firefight any day, man. And so, but no, it made me feel alive because I was with a whole bunch of people who really liked doing what they were doing, and they were putting their ass on the line to do it. And to this day, I mean, people like Jim Noctway and just on and on. We have so many friends who do it. And we need people to be out there showing you things that you're not going to see otherwise. And that's what photographers do. That's why we're in the business.
So you win the Pulitzer Prize. You're 25 years old. For some
I didn't go to Disneyland.
for some people, that could be a curse. I mean, you know, when you have that kind of incredible success at a very young age, for some people, it's really hard to get past it because it becomes self-referential. Did it open doors for you? Was it a problem? I mean, was it the best thing that ever happened to you? How do you regard winning the Pulitzer at basically the beginning of your career?
Well, that's a weird thing. And in fact, I have such good friends that when I hit 50, one of them called me up and says, "David, you know, you've now had a Pulitzer longer than you haven't." And so I don't need that, man. And so the one thing it really did for me was it'll guarantee a free obit in the New York Times. But I haven't. To me, it was a great thing to have happen, but I didn't want it to overcome what I wanted to do, which is to take pictures. In fact, the week after I won the prize, I was out and almost got killed. The cover of my book, Shooter, actually, which I think, anybody get one of those?
And one of the
Their
cards,
card.
somebody
Oh,
won a copy
man,
of
that's
David's
like,
book. Someone won it.
I know I didn't get it, but was under, Dirk Hallstead took it. It was my mentor, and that's what I felt. I was plagued by what should I do next. For 2 or 3 days, I thought about it, and I thought, well, I've got to take pictures, and which I do to this day. I mean, I love it, and it's exciting to be involved with history, a front row seat, and watching the people who make the world go around either screw it up or make it better or whatever they're doing, but I'm there to take a photograph.
So you come back from Vietnam. You're 25 years old. You won the Pulitzer Prize. You go to work for Time magazine. Is that right?
Yeah, it was Time. I went to work I was the last photographer Life hired, even though Burnett said that he was. We have that little disagreement. It didn't matter. The magazine closed. It was a horrible thing to have happen. Time hired me. I went back to the States for Time, and was covering the Watergate and the end of Spiro Agnew, vice president, resigning. I gave a talk last night at the LBJ Library in Austin, and before that I talked to a bunch of students, and they didn't know who half the people were that I photographed. So I feel like I have to like subtitle everything I do anymore. But it was Agnew resigned. I started covering Vice President or Designate Ford, and one of my favorite shots, the cover that missed, Ansel called that. And so I became friendly with Ford, really hit it off with him and the family. And the night that Nixon resigned and the night he became president, August 9th of 74, he invited me over to his house along with some other friends. I was going to be taking pictures for Time, but he asked me to stay after everybody left, and so we're sitting on the couch in his rather modest house over in Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm still a kid from Roseburg, as far as I'm concerned. I'm saying, "Dad, I'm sitting here with the President of the United States, for God's sake," in his house, and he asked me how I saw the White House photographer's job. And the previous person was Ollie Atkins with Nixon, who had no access, and everybody would tell him, very restrictive, and I just didn't want to have that kind of situation. So I looked him right in the eye and said, there are two things that are important to me. I work directly for you, not for the chief of staff or the press secretary, and I have total access. He's like puffing on his pipe, and he says, "You don't want Air Force One on the weekends?" And he actually did have a good sense of humor. So, and the next day, he said, well, he knew Ollie Atkins said it didn't want to just wanted to handle it gracefully. So he said, well, let me talk to Al Haig about this. And so the next day, I was at Time magazine, and I was paged by the operator at Time, and I called in, and she said, "David, the president wants to talk to you." I said, "Well, tell him to call back. I'm busy." And she said, "He's on the phone." And so he asked me to take the job, which I did, and literally walked across Lafayette Park, where the Time office was, in for a 2.5 fantastic assignment, really, is what it turned out to be.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's had this access before or after since you were there.
I think LBJ's photographer, Ollie Atkins, who is the godfather of modern White House photography, and that's what I lectured last night at the LBJ Library with and Clinton's photographer, the two Bush photographers, all the chiefs. And it was a great evening because you could see everybody's different style, and Okamoto had incredible access. Ollie didn't. And then after Carter beat Ford, the press asked Jody Powell, who was going to replace me, and Powell said that they didn't want another David Kennerly in the White House. And I was really
It's a compliment.
I thought it was great, yeah.
So here's a question. Here's a question. You knew Donald Rumsfeld and Cheney when they were, what, in their 30s? When they were part of...
Cheney was 34 and was the deputy chief of staff, and Rumsfeld was probably 41 or 2.
So, I mean, I think, for some people in this
Names
audience...
I can't mention at home in Santa Monica, by the way.
Well, I'm just curious. I mean, have you kept up with them?
Oh, yeah, they're close friends, and as a photographer, I have friends across the board politically. I mean, a lot of people. In fact, Dick Cheney and Pat Leahy, who's a senator from Vermont, had words that basically Cheney apparently told him to go screw himself, not in a more impolite way. And I was the only person who could ask both of them, what had happened. And so it was great, And the overriding thing was there apparently been a lot of people standing around when it happened, and then they all disappeared very quickly. So that story was corroborated on both sides. But I'm just not a political person, really, and I have friends, and they are still friends of mine, and a lot of people.
Now, you have incredible access. You're there in the White House for how long? 2.5 years?
Yeah, the 2.5-year run.
So back in the day when people did not have cell phones and iPhones and instant messaging, you had an earphone in your ear, similar to the ones we're wearing up here, where for all those 2.5 years, you had a voice whispering in your ear, telling you what was going to happen next, whether the presidential party is leaving earlier or later. You told a wonderful story once about what it was like when you left the White House and suddenly this little voice wasn't there anymore.
Well, it was like, I mean, I had a White House radio, which I didn't wear all the time, but I had a red phone in my kitchen in the White House. Pick it up, it was a direct line to the military operator because they needed to get a hold of me for stuff. And then saved a hell of a lot of money in phone bills, and thanks to all of you out here. And it was riding on Air Force One, motorcades, never stopping at a red light, having all your phone calls returned and getting a lot of other calls that you didn't want.
So what's it like when suddenly all of that disappears and you're no longer
It's like hitting a brick wall. I mean, I was 29 years old, and I'd won the Pulitzer Prize. I'd been the White House photographer. And, I mean, I couldn't, it was such a horrible time, and thank God for John Derniak, who was the picture editor of Time magazine. And this may not sound like a really good news scenario, but he sent me to the Middle East for 3 months to cover the leaders over there, a lot of whom I'd met when I was White House photographer. With King Hussein, I became friends with. And so it just got me back into the groove, and it was a remarkably helpful thing for me. It's very hard to go from that lofty place and then just back out on the street again. And basically, I had to do it.
Yeah, it must be an incredibly hard adjustment. We can do this for another 20 minutes, and we're almost out of time. I just wanted to ask you two very last quick questions.
Like, Hiroshima is coming here.
So the first is, that was when you were 29. Some years have gone by. So it seems like the one theme we've heard here throughout almost every presentation today is people have this obsession. Whatever it is they're focusing on, they can't help themselves from doing it. You're still a photographer. Of all the things that you want to be, remembered by, the things you tell your kids about, is there one thing now that you've done that is sort of like sums up, David Kennerly? You're still working hard, but I'm just saying, is there something that you've done that you were particularly proud of since?
It's a very hard time in the profession right now, and I get asked all the time by young photographers, should they do it? And whether you're a photographer, painter, whatever you're doing, you have to follow your passion. I mean, good photographers and great photographers now will still be able to work. I mean, they may be in a different form. What Maisie did tonight with video, still photography, but that's really where it's going. You know, it's like more tools to tell the story. That's not a bad thing. And I've never been anything but encouraging to other photographers, particularly.
Last question, and then we'll get off stage, is how do you convert, how do you take all of your old analog, your slides and your negatives and your prints, how do you bring them into the digital age? What are you doing to make that happen?
One thing I do, a plug here for Scan Cafe. I'm on their board of advisors, where thousands and thousands of pictures I have. It's prohibitive to get them done anywhere else. I mean, you get charged $5 or $10 a piece. I'm using them to go through my archives. I mean, a lot of stuff has been scanned by agencies and all that, but I have so many pictures, and other people do too. And one thing I really would like to do, and to get corporate funding or foundational funding, is making sure that photographers can get their stuff done. And people have been covering the news, not just the big, great
I mean,
photos.
preserve it before it's all faded and lost.
But so anybody can access it, and they pictures, as every day that goes by that we're using digital is another day that film isn't being shot, and people are just shoving it into attics and into the garages. And I feel almost evangelical about trying to save other people's pictures. I mean, my own are a big enough problem, but there are just millions of photos that should be available for history.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I got the extra 2 minutes.